Welcome to this session, and I have titled this session as Sociology and Overview. And in this session, I will provide a very broad overview of the discipline. You must be knowing that providing an overview or a summary of a discipline in a single session is almost impossible. So I would be trying to provide a rather broad arguments about the character and nature of the discipline, its important development and the major players of the discipline. Sociology is widely defined as a systematic study of the patterned social relations, or in other words, which is known as social interactions through empirical investigations and critical analysis. So what does this particular definition mean? It actually talks about a particular way of understanding society, a very systematic way of understanding the way in which society functions, with a specific focus on the subject matter, which is defined as the patterned social relations, or in other words, defined as social interaction. And how is this study done? This study is done through empirical investigation and critical analysis. We will come back to these terms later in more detail, because the idea of empirical investigation and the idea of critical analysis, they deserve much more elaborate description, and we will come back to that later. Now, this particular tendency of looking at society in a systematic critical view, is it something new, or has it not been something they arrived from the human civilization? And this is a very important question. So in the case of sociology, mostly it is said that sociology has a long past but has a very short history. It is considered to be a modern social science that emerged in the 18th and 19th century. But as we just discussed, whether a kind of a critical and systematic understanding about society, and this particular way of looking at society, it goes back much earlier. So we need to look into this debate very briefly. So there are arguments that even before the emergence of sociology in a very systematic manner in Europe, the way we understand in the contemporary society as the emergence of modern sociology, there are arguments that we had very important scholars and thinkers in different countries, in different ages, who provided some very fascinating understandings about about society. So do we call them sociologists? May not be, but they were some of the important forerunners who provide very fascinating insights about the way in which they understood society during their time. And one of the important scholars of the pre-modern times is Ibn Khaldun, a Tunisian scholar who lived between 1332 and 1406, and he was a philosopher of history, and he was a statesman, he was a judge, and he was an historian, and his book, this Muqaddimah, is widely considered by quite a lot of important scholars as an example of a pre-modern sociological understanding of society. So in this work, Ibn Khaldun elaborates a concept titled asabiyya, and if you roughly translate asabiyya, it means the idea of social cohesion. So what does social cohesion? Social cohesion is something that actually binds the society together, some kind of a force or some kind of a spirit that binds society together, something that provides a sense of we feeling to the society. So he uses this concept to understand, to explain, to examine his own society, the tribal society, the more agrarian societies, and that's a very interesting and fascinating discussion in his work. So you might be interested to see the pictures of Ibn Khaldun and the book. So I have got the pictures. On your left, it's the bust of Ibn Khaldun, and the book is also there, the Muqaddimah. Now, coming to this word sociology, where did the term sociology emerge from? So the word sociology is derived from the Latin word socius, which means companion or society, and the Latin word logos, which means knowledge or science. And we now come back to the recent times where sociology emerged as a institutionalized discipline with its own theoretical as well as methodological platforms. So, the systematic development and institutionalization of sociology happened in Europe, especially in the countries of France and Germany, even though we have thinkers from Britain, from Italy and other countries who contributed for the growth of this particular discipline. So, the first formal department of sociology in the world was established at the University of Chicago in 1892, and the American Journal of Sociology was founded in 1895. And you must be knowing that a journal is something important in the career of a particular discipline, because journals carry some of the most recent researches and advancements in the knowledge system of every discipline. And who are the important people, important scholars who laid foundations for this particular discipline? And we come to understand the discipline basically through the writings of these people. So, it is extremely important to understand the theoretical contributions of these people. So, there is a long list of names starting with Montesquieu, Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx, Max Weber, Wilfredo Pareto, George Simmel, Ferdinand Tönnies and others. We may not go through all these scholars in detail, but some of the scholars, especially Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx and Max Weber, are of profound importance, and we will go through their work in great detail. And if you look into some of their the origins of their the countries of their origin, we will see that most of them are from France and Germany, and one of them Herbert Spencer from England and Wilfredo Pareto from Italy. And so, it actually methodologically speaking, or the kind of a scientific orientation, in terms of the scientific orientation, it actually developed as a positivist science, and later developed an anti-positivist twist, which later led to the emergence of phenomenology. And these terms might look rather strange. We will come back to them in detail. But basically, this is an extremely important point to remember, that sociology emerged as a positive science, and later it developed anti-positivist strands, and later phenomenological influence became very apparent. And there are three major theoretical traditions: structural functionalism, conflict theory and symbolic interactionism. So, what do I mean by this term major theoretical traditions? We will discuss in the coming classes that sociology as a discipline provides a particular perspective to understand the knowledge. So, in other words, sociology as a discipline has a particular take, it has a particular perspective, it has a particular point of view to understand the society. But within that, sociology does not have a singular theoretical orientation, rather there are multiple competing theoretical orientations for this discipline. And each of these theoretical orientations or theoretical strands provide different distinct understanding about the society. So, within a discipline of sociology, you have competing, you have divergent theoretical traditions. So, it is important to understand the basis, the ideological basis, the epistemological basis of each of this discipline, and the kind of a methodology that emerge from there. So, in that sense, we have these three theoretical traditions: structural functionalism, conflict theory and symbolic interactionism. In fact, structural functionalism as a major theoretical perspective began to decline after 1960s, and then there are a number of other theoretical strands became important in the trajectory of sociology. The influence of a wide variety of intellectual currents, including feminism, post-colonialism, Orientalism, post-structuralism and so on. So, these developments which are more recent in times, maybe for the last 4 or 5 decades, are something very important. They very thoroughly reshaped the orientation and the nature of sociological inquiry and its theoretical basis, as well as methodological orientations. And some of the most recent developments, the emergence of globalization, and there are very important arguments that sociology as a discipline needs to be reoriented, or it needs to reinvent itself in order to understand the kind of changes happening as a part of globalization. So, there are arguments that sociology needs to develop new set of theories, a new set of methodological practices in order to understand and comprehend the kind of changes happening in a globalizing world. I am not going into the details, but this debate is something very important. Now, if you look into, if you ask me, what is the subject matter of sociology? What does sociology study? And that is a rather difficult question, because sociology studies almost every aspect of human society, and there could be nothing that is left which is not being studied by sociology. So, some of the very important themes that define our social life, I have given a lengthy list of terms, but the moment you try to understand the importance of these terms and discourses in our everyday life, you will realize that how important and central these terms in deciding the social nature of our society. So, including social stratification, the way in which how society is stratified into separate groups, about social class, the whole question of economic inequality, and social mobility, the whole idea of people able to move upward or downward in vertical or horizontal manner, and then question of religion, one of the very important topics of our current time, and question of secularization, again a very central theme in the discussion of sociology. Then the question of power, another fascinating theory very closely connected with political science. Then questions of law, questions of sexuality, gender and caste, especially in the Indian context. I think sociology is the most important discipline in India which has studied caste so systematically. No other discipline can claim to be having produced so much of knowledge about caste as compared to discipline of sociology. And of course, questions of race in the Western society, and questions of economy, consumption, globalization. So, almost every aspect of social life is being studied by sociology in a very systematic manner. Then another very important point that we need to keep in mind is that the kind of a methodology that this discipline employs is very closely connected with the theoretical premises. So, there is a very strong connection between the kind of methodology that somebody uses and the kind of larger theoretical frame he or she uses to understand the society. So, methodology does not stand in isolation, or the research method or methodology cannot be adopted as something independent of the theory. So, there is a very important methodological formulation in consonant with the specific theoretical framework, and connections, and there is a very important connection between the questions of ontology, the questions regarding the whole question of what is that, okay, and the questions of epistemology, the questions related to the question of knowing how does somebody know that, the question of knowledge about epistemology, and research methodology and research methods. So, this is an extremely important topic. We will have a very brief discussion in the coming classes, but we may not go deeper into that. But I want to highlight the point that the type of research that you do, the type of research tools that you employ, the kind of research methods that you adopt has to be informed by the larger theoretical framework that you adopt, because there is a very specific connection between the ontology, the epistemology and methodology, and towards the research methods. Then it also uses a series of both qualitative as well as quantitative research methods, and they include a long list. They include survey, they include analysis of data sets, interview schedule, focus group interviews, participant and non-participant observations, textual and content analysis, discourse analysis, network analysis, internet ethnography, and so on. So, each of these research methods, the very specific method that you use to collect data, is again decided on the basis of our understanding of what constitute social data and how do we get hold of that. And each of these questions is influenced or shaped by our larger understanding of the theoretical framework that we adopt. So, for example, survey and analysis of data sets and interview schedule, these are widely used as a part of quantitative research methods, where statistical tools are used to analyze and then they are used to reach to certain kind of conclusion, whereas almost all the latter part after that, this focus group interviews and the rest of these methods are widely considered as qualitative, because they try to understand the data mostly in the form of information which cannot be converted into numbers. And who are the people who use sociology widely, or who are the beneficiaries of sociology? And again, the list is very long. We have academics, people like you and me, who study society for a degree, for getting a particular degree, or to generate more knowledge about the society. The people who study a society in a scientific and in a systematic manner. And so, academics constitutes a very important section of people who use sociology, and sociology is one of the most important social sciences widely offered across universities and colleges all over the world. And politicians, you might be interested to see how politicians make use of sociology. Yes, politicians also make use of sociological analysis, understanding, in order to understand how the society functions, how specific groups, maybe caste groups or race groups or other kind of groups function in a particular society in terms of their voting behavior, in terms of their socio-economic locations, like their middle class or upper class, their class orientation or their caste orientation or their specific ideological orientations. All these informations are very important for the politicians as well, especially in this modern day politics. Politicians make use of each of these information very carefully. Another important set of beneficiaries or people who make use of sociology is bureaucrats, who are basically entrusted with the task of framing policies, because the data generated by sociologists, by doing research work, by collecting data from the field and with very specific policy implications, this data is very important for bureaucrats to devise various plans for certain welfare measures, to reformulate specific governmental policies, and even to to implement a host of developmental as well as bureaucratic aspects. And policymakers in larger realms, people who are concerned with larger policy decisions, and even corporates. Corporates constitute a very important group of people who make use of sociology, especially corporates and companies who look into the consumption pattern of huge population. How do they consume? What do they consume? What are their preferences? And also a number of new emerging corporates invest huge amount of money in understanding how people behave with respect to, for example, how people make use of technology in specific forms, how people use mobile phones or how people use social media platform. So, these are all especially in this age of artificial intelligence, this amount of data and the kind of sociological insights that are derived from this information is something very important for corporates. So, in that sense, sociology is an important discipline which offers a very fascinating understanding about the society. It has a very interesting history. It emerged in a very specific context in Europe, and it is now spread across the globe. It's been widely taught across the educational institutions, and it offers very fascinating and interesting understanding about the society around one's own life, and it more importantly, it offers very interesting insights about one's own life, the way we live in this world, the kind of choices that we are making, the kind of freedom that we are experiencing, and the kind of unfreedom that we will be able to negotiate if we carefully go through the kind of social processes that are around us. So, we will conclude this session here, and we'll meet you for the next class. Thank you.